I want to let you guys in on something, okay? This exotic, it's garbage. It's overrated. It's trash. And you know what you do with trash? Yeah. Gone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Eunoia. Solar Warlocks, especially after the buddy changes update, have actually become pretty good at killing things and not just the throw speaker turrets and call it a day class. However, dear viewer, Eunoia is not the answer. You're thinking too narrowly with Eunoia. And if you really want to learn how to get the most out of your Hellion, then you have come to the right place. Allow me to enlighten you. You see, the thing with Eunoia is that you need to be far away from the target for your Hellion to actually do its thing or the exotic perk to trigger. You know, if you want it to do the max damage and have it split into its submunitions, you have to be far away enough from the target, because if I'm right next to Carl here, I'm not going to get the submunitions. I'm just going to get a normal Hellion, so I have to be far away enough for actually work in the first place. And I don't know about you guys, I would rather that my Hellion did maximum damage all the time, regardless of whether I was away from the target or not, it's doing max damage. And that, dear viewer, is where the Verity's Brow exotic comes in. If you haven't really caught on already, I've made a couple Verity builds on the channel so far, but with the Buddy Changes update that literally just happened a few weeks ago, this exotic is now S tier for buffing the damage of your buddies, especially Hellion, far better than Eunoia in my opinion. So, Verity's Brow, it has the main trait, the fourth magic, weapon final blows with a damage type matching your grenade grant death throws, which provide a grenade damage bonus and grant you grenade energy. When you have death throws and throw a grenade, nearby allies gain greatly increased grenade regeneration for a short time. Don't worry about that last part. Basically, getting kills with solar weapons in this case is going to increase the damage of our grenades, aka Hellion, because it counts as a grenade now. So I just want to give you a quick idea of the damage that we are dealing with here. So, you know, I get a kill here, I'm going to get 1 stack of death throws, 2 stacks, and 3 stacks, and 4. I'm going to get my 5th one here. I'm going to show you how much my Hellion does versus this champion. It's pretty chunky. Stun him here real quick. 4 shots, 3 shots to kill. It's not bad at all, and obviously it fires pretty slowly, but that's a pretty hefty chunk of damage that you're just going to have passively while you're doing your thing with your other bits of your loadout. So the firing range gameplay won't do it much justice, but there will be plenty of gameplay of the actual build shown throughout this video so you can get an idea of the true strength of the build. So without further ado, let's get into it, and if you enjoyed today's content, then a like and subscribe is greatly appreciated, and allow me to share with you the wisdom of Verity's Brow, not Eunoia, when it comes to buffing your Hellion. So diving right in, starting off with the subclass, I've actually gone for the Daybreak super here. This is just because, you know, it's a little bit of whimsy. I haven't used this super in, I don't know, maybe 5 years. It's never been particularly relevant, but it does have one thing going for it, and that is actually the slam attack, because if you didn't know this, when you pop the super, you've obviously got your sword attacks, your regular old sword attacks that you can use, but you can also use your class ability, and it does this slam attack, which I bet you some of you probably didn't even know it could do, because you haven't used this super in God knows how long. But if you have Hellion equipped, this slam attack is going to refresh your Hellion, and it recharges pretty quickly, so you can just use it over and over again to get your Hellions back when you are in your super, so just something to be aware of there. But that being said, if you wanted, yes, definitely go for Well of Radiance or Song of Flame, you know, depending on what you're doing, what your team needs. This is just for, you know, shits and giggles. These two supers are definitely better, you know, overall scope with regards to solo Warlock supers. Probably Song of Flame just for, you know, solo play. Then for the rest of the abilities, we have Phoenix Dive. This has the lowest cooldown, so it's going to give us the most amount of uptime on our Hellion, plus it's also just good for movement. Then I've gone for Incinerator Snap. Your melee for this build doesn't actually matter, it's kind of personal preference because we're not actually going to be using it a lot. Our main offensive tool is of course Hellion. Then I've gone for the Healing Grenade just for some extra survivability and a way of getting restoration to get a restoration loop going for the build. Now for your second aspect, other than Hellion of course, this one's non-negotiable. It is kind of up to you, and I'll give you reasons as to why I would recommend each one. Me personally, I always like going with Icarus Dash when I'm playing Solar Warlock, not because I just want the movement benefits that it provides obviously, but tactically it is just a very solid aspect for PvE. Now you may not initially realize this, but with the amount of enemies in the game that like slow you, pull you, CC you in some way, having something like an Icarus Dash to get out of the way of those enemies is rather useful. Just think about the amount of times that you've been caught by say a Weaver pull attack and you wished you could get out of it. Well, Icarus Dash helps you get out of that, and it could save you from certain death in certain situations. So I always like Icarus Dash, plus the movement bonus is quite nice. However, if you wanted to go for something that was slightly more offensive, you can go for Touch of Flame with, say, a solar grenade. This combo here does quite a lot of damage. In fact, I'll show you. So a singular Touch of Flame fusion grenade here. I'm just going to let it tick on Carl just to see how much damage it actually does. But as you can see, it is a pretty substantial amount, almost 5k damage from just a grenade, which you can use to shut down an area. So that is another option if you would like. Then finally, your third option is Heat Rises. This one lets you fire your weapons while gliding. It's basically the AC-130 cosplay. You guys know what Heat Rises does. It's been in the game since, you know, the beginning. Just lets you fly around, fire your weapons while you're airborne, reload them, so on and so on. I don't personally really like Heat Rises for this build. You know, I'm more of an Icarus Dash person, and then I'll go with the Healing Grenade here. But it is kind of up to you. Whichever playstyle you prefer, you can very much, you know, mold it to your own style. So then quickly going over the fragments now. The first one we have is Ember of Resolve. This one is going to make it so Solar Grenade Final Blows cure you. And because Hellion counts as a solar grenade now, you can pretty much see where this is going. So just doing a quick demo of this here. If I damage myself, get to about half health, pop my Hellion and get a kill here. I forgot that cures me, hold on. Then I get a kill here. There we go. There's cure ×1. There's cure again. In fact, I'll keep damaging myself so you can keep seeing it. I'll get all the way down to red bar here. Get some cure here, cure there, cure again. So it's just a nice way of getting some extra healing on Solar Warlock, which actually wasn't previously available to us. So having your Hellion deal both damage and sustain you now is very nice, all thanks to Ember of Resolve. Carrying on, our next fragment is going to be Ember of Empyrean, classic solar fragment. You're just going to want this because it's going to allow you to extend the duration of your restoration and radiant effects applied to you, and we're going to talk about how we get those effects as we go. In fact, restoration, the only way that you're going to be able to get it is from your Healing Grenade. So if you're going with Icarus Dash, I would recommend having Healing Grenade here, because this is going to give you your source of restoration that you're going to be able to extend with Ember of Empyrean. Then for our third fragment, we are going to have Ember of Singeing. This one is going to make it so your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets, and actually our weapon choice is going to allow us to scorch targets. This is just going to make sure we have 100% uptime on our Hellion. We're basically never going to lose it because of Ember of Singeing. And then finally, our fourth fragment is going to be Ember of Ashes, which is simply going to make it so you apply more scorch to targets, and in most cases it is 50% more, so just going to be getting to those ignitions a lot quicker. In fact, just so you are aware, a Ember of Ashes Hellion is able to ignite a target in 3 blobs. The only way you can get it in 2 blobs is if you use Eunoia, but well, we're not using Eunoia today. 2 versus 3 blobs, not really a huge difference. So that about does it for our subclass. Now I want to go over the stats that we use for this build. And because this is a Hellion based build, and because it counts as a grenade now, you are obviously going to want to pour as much of your stats into the grenade stat as possible. Mine is sitting at 180. Then for the rest of your stats, you are definitely going to want 100 super, just as a kind of piece of advice for any of your build crafting. You know, guys, 100 super, always use this. Any build that you are just making, try to get 100 super. There are very few builds in this game where you don't care about the super at all. You basically just want 100 super all the time. Get it through fonts, get it through your natural stats, doesn't matter, try to get 100 super. After that, the only stat that actually matters is class, because we obviously going to want that to get our Hellion back the fastest. I've gone for 70 here, but you can just as easily get this higher if you have better armor than I do, or you can top it up with something like a class font on your class item, which will give you +20, making it up to 90 for me in my case. So yep, just really high grenade stat. If you get up to 180, my grenade's going to be doing 54.5% more damage in PvE, and then it's going to be 65% at 200 if you make it all the way there. Now in terms of the armor archetypes that allow me to get to the stats, my Verity's Brow is a Grenadier with a tertiary stat in health, pretty unoptimal tertiary stat if you ask me. Then we have another Grenadier piece with a tertiary stat in class, another Grenadier piece with a tertiary stat in melee, then another Gunner piece with a tertiary stat in class, then finally another Grenadier with a tertiary stat in weapons. This could be better, it could be class, so if you get better gear, you can get better stats than I have. Now let's talk a little bit about the weapons that we are using in this build, and the star of the show is actually Tommy's matchbook. Now, I haven't used this weapon in quite some time, but when I was cooking up this build, this weapon just fits so perfectly into it that, you know, it just makes sense. So essentially, I do want to explain this weapon a little bit because it has been reworked in the past. It does work slightly differently to its original iteration. So it has the main perk Ignition Trigger. Sustain fire with this weapon overheats it, increasing damage but burning the user. And then it has the secondary trait Heatsink. Overheat damage is reduced while not aiming down sights, so you're basically going to want to be hip firing this weapon, but thankfully it does have pretty good hip fire accuracy. And then lastly, you are also going to want the Catalyst, because the Catalyst states, while Ignition Trigger is active, final blows with this weapon cure you, and sustain fire scorches your target. So we're going to be getting some extra damage over time, plus even more heals to negate the damage over time that we get from Ignition Trigger, the self damage. Now the way this works differently now is that there's actually a meter for Ignition Trigger. As you can see, if I start firing, I get the ignition trigger meter in the bottom left of my screen, and once it reaches full, that just means that it's just going to stay there. But if I reload, it's going to slowly tick down. However, if I keep shooting again, it's going to stay in this overcharged state, where previously, after you reloaded, you'd have to charge it way up again. But because we have this meter now, you can maintain it in this form for as long as you're reloading and then quickly reapplying the firing button. In fact, you don't even need to deal damage. I just noticed it is just firing the weapon over and over. So as long as you've got any bit of ignition trigger in the bottom left and keep shooting, you will maintain it. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is that the damage bonus that you get from ignition trigger is actually double damage. As you can see here, I deal 26 damage to the body with Tommy's matchbook when there's no perks active. Then if I get all the way up to ignition trigger, now I'm doing 52, as you can see here. In fact, I just lost it. So let me get a little bit more ignition trigger stacks. And as you can see, I am dealing 52 damage to the targets. So yes, it is double damage versus enemies when you have ignition trigger active, which is pretty good. Furthermore, this season there is overload auto rifle, so this is going to help you versus overload champions. And then for my second weapon, of course, I've gone for mint retrograde, rocket pulses. Overpowered, so just use this if you have stat roll, doesn't matter, just go for mint retrograde, gives you anti-barrier as well. Perfect pairing, Tommy's matchbook and mint retrograde. You're gonna have a lot of fun with this, I promise you. Now for your armor set bonus, I've said this in basically every build that I've created for this channel, but you are probably gonna want to go for the 2-piece ion adapter, which will give you some bonus splash damage resistance when getting kills with your rocket pulses or any micro missile source. Could also go for the lustrous set as well if you wanted to get some benefits to your solar weapons when you heal yourself. But again, the set bonuses for this build aren't really that important, so let's move on and let's talk about the artifact now instead. So the first important mod that we are going to want for the build is Fever and Chill. This mod states that rapid precision hits with solar weapons grant radiant, and rapid precision hits with stasis weapons grant frost armor. Now that second part doesn't matter because we're not using stasis weapons. However, the precision kills part is actually a lie. All you need is 3 regular kills, like 3 multi-kills, and then it gives you 10 seconds of radiant. And because we have Ember of Empyrean, continuous kills is just going to give me back more of that time, but it's also going to be refreshed from Fever and Chill as well. I don't think there's an internal cooldown on Fever and Chill, so this is just going to make it so we get basically 24/7 Radiant for getting kills with Tommy's matchbook, and it's never going to fall off. And by the way, Radiant is a 20% damage buff, so it's pretty nice to have. After that, staying in column 3, we are going to want Refresh Threads. This will make it so picking up an elemental pickup matching your subclass gives you a little bit of ability energy to your least charged ability, which for the most part is going to be Hellion, and the way that we get those elemental pickups, which in this case is going to be Fire Sprites, comes from our next mod, Elemental Coalescence. This one states that defeating targets has the chance to create an elemental pickup matching your equipped super element. I think it's anywhere between 4 and 7 kills from any source will make a Fire Sprite, so just pair these two together to get some better energy cycling back with your Hellion. The next mod that we are going to want is Elemental Daze in column 4. It's going to make it so stunning a champion with an elemental weapon creates an elementally aligned explosion, applying a matching elemental debuff to them and nearby targets. Pretty underrated mod, just adds a little bit of extra explosion damage when stunning things like barrier champions or overload champions. Then after that, we are going to want energy acceleration to allow our rocket pulses to emit a kinetic shockwave when they deal damage. And actually, fun fact about this mod is that the shockwave actually stuns unstoppable champions. It doesn't say that anywhere on the description of the perk, but it does. Take a look at this. There you go, stuns the champ. And the reason for that, dear viewer, a little bit of trivia here, is that I believe in episode Revenant, there was a similar artifact perk that allowed your heavy grenade launchers to make a kinetic shockwave, and it also stunned unstoppable champions. However, it was stated in the perk description back then, so this mod is clearly a copy-paste of that one. They just forgot to take out the unstop stun portion, so just something nice to be aware of. The last 2 mods we are going to want are Radiant Shrapnel. This will make it so dealing sustained weapon damage while you are radiant or defeating a scorched combatant with a weapon will cause the target to release solar projectiles that deal damage and scorch on impact. This is just going to add a little bit of lethality to your Tommy's matchbook whenever you are dealing damage with it, which is pretty nice. Then finally, we are also going to want Shield Crush, which will make it so while you are amplified or radiant, which we are going to be basically 24/7, your grenade, aka Hellion, is going to recharge faster. Well, that doesn't matter, but it will also deal increased damage. So even more damage onto your Hellion just for having Shield Crush, just for being radiant, which we are going to be all the time. Very nice to have. So that about does it for the artifact, so let's wrap things up with the mods. Now, for the helmet, the first mods I'm taking are 2 copies of Ashes to Asset, so that kills with Hellion give me more super energy. Then I've also gone for a harmonic siphon, or solar siphon in this case, which will allow me to make orbs from double kills with Tommy's matchbook. On the gloves, I have 1 copy of firepower so that my Hellion kills occasionally make orbs, a grenade font, which is going to allow my 180 grenade to go to 200 whenever we're holding armor charge because it gives plus 20. Then a solar loader because the reload stat on Tommy's matchbook is actually 0. Take that if you want. It does make the build feel a little bit nicer. The reload is admittedly pretty slow. Then for the chest piece, doesn't matter. Boots, I always like to go stacks on stacks in this current day and age because you get 2 stacks of armor charge from collecting an orb, which in a world where fonts help to round out your stats just gives you even more time on said fonts to keep the bonus stats up, which is pretty nice. Then I've gone for absolution and insulation to get a little bit more energy when collecting said orbs. Then finally, for the class item, we have time dilation to improve the duration of our fonts, a class font, which for me is going to raise my class stat from 70 to 90, then a powerful attraction so that when I am using my Phoenix Dive, I will get any nearby orbs collected to me automatically. Now, as far as the gameplay loop is concerned for this build, your aim should just be to open an engagement by using your Phoenix Dive, spawning your Hellion, and then just allowing it to get kills, scorch enemies, using your Tommy's matchbook to build up stacks of Verity to improve the damage of your Hellion all the way up to 100%. And from there on, it's pretty easy to maintain the loop because by that point, you are going to be Radiant, your Hellion is going to be dealing a bunch of damage, you're going to have really convenient anti-champion from both of your weapons, you're just going to be shredding through all of your enemies, and you should have constant healing if you started your gameplay loop with a healing grenade as well to give you restoration. This build is honestly the most fun I've had on Solar Warlock in quite some time, and I very much recommend it if you're looking to try something else other than Eunoia, because like I said at the beginning, that exotic is overrated as hell. Verity's Brow is where it's at, dear viewer. Anyway, the fashion I use for the build is here on screen if you would like to take a look and copy. Again, this is a set that I've used from Crips multiple times in my videos, so shout out to him and his community for creating such awesome fashion. Really like the tactical style here with the tactical Verity's Brow ornament, and as always, the dim link for this build will be in the description for you to copy it hassle-free. And with that, we have come to the end of the video, so thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the build, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.